A very good evening to all the participants in this special round of our webinar series. And warm greetings and welcome to each one of you on behalf of TCG Digital family. It's an unprecedented time we are currently in. COVID-19 has brought a new normal. Disruption is now a way of life. The tectonic shift for recovery in this post-lockdown period will witness working from home at scale. Equipment is no longer with an organization's internal security setup, making enterprises more vulnerable and exposed to fast-thriving cybercriminals. In such a backdrop, we start our today's webinar, Fortify Your Cyber Resilience Amid COVID-19. Let me introduce our venerable chief anchor and host, Mr. Sudipta Kumar Sen, a well-acclaimed and illustrious industry veteran, also the president of TCG Digital Solutions. Mr. Sen has over 3.5 decades of rich experience in the analytics and IT industry. He has served McKinsey & Company as a partner and the SAS Institute India as the vice chairman, member of board, CEO and MD. Mr. Sen is reckoned as a major thought leader and has been recognized as one of the 10 most influential analytics leaders in India. Welcome, Mr. Sen. Over to you, sir.
Good evening, friends. A very, very warm welcome to all of you this evening on this webinar. I'm indeed delighted to see such enthusiastic participation. I understand from my administration team that the numbers which are right now who are logged in are running into triple digit, which is very good news, which shows that the kind of interest which people have is phenomenal. I firmly believe that the challenging situation that we are going through today has brought in a lot of scenarios which we need to look at carefully. Many of us today, we are meeting in this webinar because of the new paradigm, new norm. Otherwise, probably we would be having this event in a hotel or in a conference facility. But the fact that we are participating in this, maybe some of us are using our own devices, which could be smartphones, which could be digital pads, or it could be the laptops. But if there are own devices, chances are that probably it has not gone through the security hardening process as probably would have happened to all the devices which are provided by the organizations. Also, many of us may not be on the virtual private networks and scenarios of that kind. That being said, it opens up opportunities for the hackers, for the security threats to be much higher than what probably it was there before. That being said, in today's session, we are going to be deliberating, we are going to be streaming the minds of some of the finest professionals who are part of today's panel. And let's learn from their experiences to see how well we should be fortifying our organizations from the threat of cybersecurity in the current context. Some inputs on housekeeping. While the administrator of this webinar would mute all our mics, request you not to switch it on, otherwise it would be creating a noise. We encourage you to participate in the polls. Also, should you have any questions, at the end of the session, we have planned for a question answer session. And to participate in there, you could go on to the right-hand side of the box of your webinar, where there's a place meant for asking the questions. And once you do that, my colleague Supratik will be coordinating to take those questions and pass it on to the various panelists appropriately for them to be answered based on the time available at the end of the session. One more request to all of you. In today's session, many of us are sitting at different places, working from our home, and therefore, while passing on the baton, there could be some technology challenges, though we have tried our level best to make sure that there shouldn't be any such disruptions. But should there be a minor delay, appreciate your patience in advance. So on that note, let me kind of go on and introduce to you our first panelist. Our first panelist is Mr. Sumit Dattagupta. Sumit is an acclaimed leader and is presently the group CIO of Haldia Petrochemicals and MCPI. Prior to taking on the current role, Sumit has held many leadership positions in organizations like Reliance Industries Limited, Roltas, etc. He is an alumnus of BIT Mesra and IIFT, which is Indian Institute of Foreign Trade. May I now invite Sumit to share his valuable inputs in this webinar. Over to you.
Good afternoon to you all. So I think in today's scenario, the post-COVID, where work from home is a new norm which is emerging, and a typical, to our manufacturing industry, where we have the OT and the IT layer interface working seamlessly, the cyber security has become all more important for us, and to ensure that we have a seamless and a secure data transfer during the process and the business is utmost important. One of the major fact, if you see the work from home scenarios, the cyber attack is more prone to certain, innovations from the cyber attackers, because they always try to go for the weak spots, and there where we'd have to fill in our cyber resilience strategies. So both at the group level for HPL and MCPI, we have a very strong cyber framework which is already in place to ensure that we are ready, we are also responsive, and wherever, if some attack happens, we have a recovery mechanism in place. So first, let's define what is the cyber attack. Why it is almost, it's sort of an attempt, to either an expose, or it will alter, or they will try to disable the whole data integrity, or destroy also. It can be internal, it can be external, and they will always try to gain an unauthorized entry or access to your system. So I was just reading this Verizon the details which is coming out with the investigation report. So it says in 2019, there were about 30% of the business reported having cyber attacks in the 12-month period. And in an industry like us, where we have an OT and IT interface, the loss to business could be enormous. Because if small attack in our OT system can run our production haywire. And since we are a continuous process plant, it is utmost important for us to take those security measures very seriously. So this means that organizations may not fully appreciate the full consequences of breaches, and they may fail to take some adequate provisions. But in our case, we have to take those provisions, keeping in mind that our plant has to run 24 into 7, 365 days. So in our organization, as I had iterated initially, the framework which we have worked out, the first is the readiness. We call it 3R. So readiness is basically an individual readiness, because it starts with an individual who has to be fully aware, like where are the cyber risks coming in. So we do a corporate preparedness run, every month in some sort of an online meetings and some sort of flyers going about of the mail, where we try to stress on good housekeeping, like how to protect your passwords. There were a lot of awareness and training involved in terms of how to handle your mails when it comes up. When you identify whether there is a phishing mail inherently has come in or not, especially from the work from home scenarios where people, some of the cases, the devices are their own personal devices, how to handle the cyber security measures which we have implemented and see if there are any aberrations coming, how to report that, how to at least go and work into a system. So all those trainings are regularly going on. So that's the readiness. So the important part is that we have to raise the bar in terms of the security standard. And the information security awareness is one of the resilient cyber security policies which we are trying to enforce. There is also a handbook which is given to our employees when they join in, and this is reiterated in a regular basis through online polls and surveys to make the awareness active, so that they are aware of what is our impact analysis, the business impact analysis, what is the continuity plan we have, and how is the crisis management plan will activate in case of the scenario happens. Now, cyber readiness goes hand in hand, obviously, with our IT system testing, and we do have a very quality check done at the regular interval. We also hire some outside consultants to do the penetration testing, so that that's some sort of a proactive approach we take, so that we anticipate, assess, and prepare and respond, also contain anything which is coming all of a sudden. So we try to minimize the risks as far as possible. So that is how we are presently going ahead and coming up with a readiness check. The next R is the response. Now, response has to be very fast, and it has to be a planned way. We cannot do it in an ad hoc way. So it is always measured, by the scale of attack and extent how it will cross-contaminate the system, So it has to be, addressed operationally, tactically, and strategically. So in that way, we have the business continuity plan, which is in place. Because a strong business continuity plan will enable our critical activities to continue. And that is very important, for a manufacturing industry where we have a lot of manufacturing execution system running day in, day out. That is one of the critical factors to have a business continuity plan. We have our BIS. The BIS basically identifies the people, system, and equipment and the workspace which are required to be support to deliver critical activities. The mitigation strategy is basically, the BCP, we ensure that critical products and services are not affected, by the incident, and there is a robust recovery, mechanism in place. One of the important facts is that not only we have the mechanism in place, we also have implemented the workaround so that the business goes on as usual, and we take some time if any incident happens to come back. So these are some of the plans which we do some mock drills on a yearly basis to start with right now, but we are trying to now increase this frequency since we are going into the work from home scenarios. So those, mock drills are getting more active nowadays so that we understand also what type of threats, the threats have increased or the types of threats are different. So all those things are putting, a secure plan for crisis management also. Because CMP, as we call, because that needs a very wider and a seamless coordination, which can reduce the impact on the people and the operating environment. And obviously, a serious cyber attack, which may lead to business loss or a process downtime, can severely impact the reputation of the company. So that also we'll have to keep in mind, because, and that is very important. So CMP's main idea is to mitigate any potential, for these impacts by putting in place the structures and systems which will ensure a coordinated and coherent response. And this is something which we have already felt in some of the incidents which has happened for 6 months back, where we had some sort of an intended process historian tag, where we ensure that we bypass the process historian for a time being, restore the backup with a contingency plan, and the process in turn were not interrupted. So that was one of the reasons, since we had a very good crisis management plan in place, the stakeholders, including the business stakeholders, were in sync when we activated that plan to minimize the affected risks. The third R is the recovery, and that's very important. You may have your CMPs very well, you have your responses very well, but then if you are under attack, how do you recover? So the initial response to the cyber attack, it is very crucial to map the recovery of the business and the IT system to reduce the long-term impacts. So initial tactical recovery is driven by the BCP that we have in place, which ensures that critical activities are brought, back in a very, I would say, in a very seamless way. Because unless you don't have the critical activities back in place as fast as possible, the business loss and the impact will be huge. The strategic recovery, concerns the corporate recovery and the short-term business continuity. So in a whole, the tactical and the strategic lessons from the cyber attacks, we try to re-engineer and embed it in our BCP and CMP plan so that we improve our readiness and the response of the recovery for the subsequent incident. So that's how we call it the lessons learned, and that we ensure not only from incidents which come in, but potential incidents. We also keep a track of what worldwide is happening, particularly to our process industry, try to learn from different stakeholders to ensure that we are always upgraded, and also the knowledge skills within the IT folks are up to the mark to ensure that any unplanned incidents are taken care of. Training and exercises, yes, that is a very important part. Training for an operational response focuses on the non-technical skills, like which are the core building blocks. For example, the situational awareness, which is basically very important. Decision making, decision has to be timely and it has to be effective and defensible also. Then the important part in this whole thing is the leadership has to be taken into confidence. So the leadership must be assured that we are working within the flexibility and adaptability of both the BCP and the CMP plans, and we ensure the leaders react to the situation and consult each other, and operating a command or a control system in terms of crisis. So that is also seamlessly taken care of, because ultimately the decisions also has to be coming forthwith and with a knowledgeable base. So that communication has to be effective, efficient, timely, and clear, so that there is no confusion when you are handling a crisis situation like a cyber attack. Now, exercising what we are helping, within HPL, MCPI, because each of these response is a bit of a complex and unique, when it impacts the different stakeholders. In our case, the plant is a very important asset for us, and it touches the very, ingredient of our survival. Or in terms of the corporate, our ERP, which is the SAP system, is also very critical to ensure that we have a seamless billing, other financial functions, because a lot of these financial functions are integrated with the outside world, with the banking system, with export commitment, GSTN portal. We have Waybill, which is integrated. We have e-invoicing, which is integrated. So all those integration factors are prone to cyber attacks. And there where we have a strong resilience in terms of our team, to ensure that the HPL and the MCPI is committed, to work with the stakeholders, both internal and external, to mitigate all the challenges, which is posed by any incident. So we use different bespoke methodology to enhance our readiness, response and recovery. And we also have a sound, solutions and systems in place. We have good partnership with different other stakeholders to ensure that we are regularly upgraded in terms of the security commitment. So in a way, I would say in today's world post-COVID, especially for the manufacturing industry, which has to open out in terms of its data to be made available on a real-time basis, along with the business data, which will have to be combined together to have a useful insight for our business stakeholders. It is very imperative that we have a strong cyber resilience policy in place, and that is what we are today maintaining. And as of now, we in HPL and MCPI as a group is fully committed to ensure that the stakeholders are secured, and we also are fully geared up in terms of our actions or the mitigations which we need to do to have this framework up and running 24/7. Work from home is definitely going to be a new norm, because there will new business models which going to be emerged, in this scenario. So as an, IT security framework, which basically used to handle more of a corporate or plant and office setup, this is a different dimensions where you have people who will be sitting in different geographies, will have different types of assets to log in. So you should have a seamless, security policies embedded within that framework, which you are going to extend now to different stakeholders who are really not sitting at a particular place or a plant. And it is almost important also to review security policies around that ecosystem, which is now an extended one. But all the way, we also have to ensure that users, when they're working from home or anywhere else, are also at ease. It should not happen that we have security protocols in place which basically give them that flexibility or non-flexibility to work in a way where he may not be feeling comfortable to doing his job. So it is something which we have to work out seamlessly with the business stakeholders, and also to ensure that risks to the company in terms of cyber attack is minimum. Obviously, you will target not only minimum should be a zero incident framework, but then you have to always see to it how do you minimize the impact to your corporate infrastructure.
Thank you very much, Sumit, for sharing very insightful observations as well as thought-provoking ideas which we need to kind of follow through. For example, issues with respect to response, recovery, also doing the mock drills in order to figure out from where the attacks are likely to come, and should that happens, what's our readiness to do the firefighting, going right up to the leadership team to make sure that each one of them are aware of what, as a command and control scenario, they need to do should there be a situation like this. I think these are some of the interesting observations and learnings which we got from your very impactful presentation. Thank you very much. May I now introduce to you the next panelist for this session. Mr. Sudeep Banerjee is a distinguished industry veteran and an IT leader with more than a couple of decades of experience behind him. He was the group CTO of Reliance Capital. Currently, he is the Director Transformation Strategy in Zscaler, an alumnus of IIT Kharagpur, and he is very astute in terms of what he has done in his various roles as a IT and business professional. May I now invite Sudeep to share his thoughts. Over to you, Sudeep.
If you have to talk about work, so work has to proceed essentially. So for companies to be productive, for companies to produce goods and services, essentially, people need to work. If they are not able to work in their offices today, they have to work from home, and that is what has happened because companies had to send their almost their entire workforce back home. If you look, at companies, essentially, let's look at the IT and the security, the risk, infrastructure. Work from home was a paradigm only for maximum 5 to 10 percent of the overall workforce. Mostly people, let's say, who are having a roaming work profile, people in sales, people in let's say in field collections in terms of the lending company, etc. Or maybe senior management people who would move from office to office or go and work from various places like hotels or airports. But today, essentially, everybody is working from home. So a company's strategy around business continuity, IT, DR, these are all kind of drawn up, thinking about a situation where maybe a certain portion of the workforce gets impacted, or a certain number of locations. Let's say a company operates, let's say about 100 offices. Maybe the business continuity would look into, okay, there could be floods, or there could be a cyclone in some part of the country, and few offices could be shut down. So those office workers may not be able to continue there, and they have to look for alternate arrangements. So entire business continuity program was done at that scale, but suddenly everything has been upended because now the entire country, the entire world is around lockdown. So we are talking here about Indian organizations, but think about multinationals who has got presence across across the globe. So the impact is felt by every company. And in this, normal, a couple of things happened. So, good part, let's say in India, at least in the past decade, the telecom revolution has ensured that availability of mobile connectivity today is not all pervasive, but mostly if you talk about metros or tier one, tier two kind of cities and towns, there's a good availability of mobile broadband. So people have connectivity from home. Did not used to be the case, earlier. So that is one. And secondly, the resiliency of internet essentially. Imagine such a huge amount of workload coming up on the internet. People working from home, their kids doing schooling from home, they're getting all their entertainment on all these platforms like Netflix and everything on home. We are doing all these Zoom calls, Skype calls, So definitely there's a huge amount of load on the internet. And frankly, thanks to all the investments which internet service providers, the global giants, they've set up the infrastructure and very high speed kind of peering interconnects across the globe. That has really helped to, take this additional load and at least provide the connectivity layer. On top of that connectivity layer, now comes security. Uh, there are bad actors all around us, and people, they would always try to take advantage of this kind of situation where there is risk, there is a perception of risk, there is a perception of fear all around us. Suddenly, fake websites around coronavirus or COVID-19 has mushroomed. Suddenly, there are lots of apps which have come on the Play stores, both on Apple, on Android, which are absolutely fake. They're all posing interesting, kind of things. For example, okay, you download this app, it would tell you who are the kind of infected COVID patients around you, or where can you find out, sanitizers or masks, close by. These are nothing but all fake, apps. Similarly, websites. All they tend to do is essentially, introduce malware, introduce, phishing or spear phishing attacks on unsuspecting individuals, and thereby gain access to corporate networks. Uh, that is really a grave concern, because let's say once the situation eases and employees start coming back into offices, uh, the last thing IT people or anybody in the company wants is to have a serious cybersecurity risk, after this pandemic, to start spreading around the organization. We already are hearing about, kind of large-scale ransomware or other threats, which many organizations are seeing. Think about the national critical infrastructure of this country. Think about the government, how they are protecting those assets. So these are again, kind of concern areas. Now, I see two sets of kind of organizations. One which have so nobody ever anticipated a pandemic and a situation like this. Nobody, but they have been kind of forward-looking organizations who have been at the forefront of, let's say, digital. They have already taken steps at least to ensure that when they've been struck by this kind of a misfortune, they have been really quick to react. They've been not, blindsided essentially, and they've been able to successfully deploy massive, manpower and resources, and ramp up scale and capacity so that work from home becomes feasible and practical. Uh, the other set of company, they have been kind of just caught in the kind of floodlights, so they have been kind of slow to react, even in terms of basic stuff. For example, endpoint device, not everybody has a laptop in the office. Many people work from desktops. So would they move the desktops back to home? How would those desktops, which don't have a built-in Wi-Fi connector, connect to a Wi-Fi router at home? Secondly, many employees, they don't have a fixed broadband kind of connection back at their home. All they have is, like, for example, patchy mobile connectivity, which may or may not kind of work in all times. So a company's kind of posture, how they've done, and how they set up their internal IT network and security infrastructure has also mattered a lot between a successful company in these times and not so successful company. We all know about cloud migration. So, for example, many companies have built their applications, and they've kind of migrated some of their applications from the data center onto the cloud. Uh, and if you do that, then of course there is a faster path that you can do, to reach those applications. Um, VPN, which traditionally had been a technology for doing remote working, now the VPN again was capacitized, and the appliances and the internet bandwidth and everything was actually designed only for that 10 or 15% of the workforce. In no way it is going to kind of give respite or a solution for 100% of the workforce. And if you have to scale the VPN gateway by adding more appliances or by procuring more licenses, how will you do that? The entire supply chain today of IT gear is all broken. Even if you order, it would take months for those appliances to get delivered. So, I'm finding good traction of a new set of technology, which is essentially a cloud technology, a cloud security technology, which is kind of, helping. The way this technology works is that users don't need to kind of use VPN and connect back to the data center and then go out to, let's say, internet or the internal applications. They can very well use the power of the internet, and when the traffic reaches the cloud, the security provider has all the company's business rules coded there, uniform policy, so that each and every employee, irrespective of whether they are working from office location or from home, gets a uniform security policy, and thereby they can have a faster and safer access to applications. Uh, so I think that's proving to be the new normal, and I mean, we just hope that this crisis is behind us in the fastest time possible. But I guess companies will not be in a position to bring back the entire workforce back to office. They have to have a mixed strategy, or maybe rotate. Certain people working certain days from home, certain days from office, and they have to have enabling infrastructure, security, and everything to enable that style of work. So I cannot comment much on the manufacturing sector because you need people to go back to factories to produce the goods. So I can talk about services sector, and India has a huge services sector. So all these large IT companies, and we are doing so much of work with so many foreign clientele. So that sector can actually work without much of a issue in this mode. What needs possibly to have a look is how do we keep on have the confidence high among, let's say, the enterprise customers of these companies, okay, so that that their processes, their data, everything is safe in this new work from home kind of a landscape, which means you need to prove to them that even if my employees are working from home and servicing your business processes, all your data and everything is safe, and there are detailed audit logs. You can come and check things. Secondly, from the point of view of the government, so for example, Department of Telecommunications, DOT initially had some reservations in terms of sending people like call center employees or BPO employees working from home, for let's say enterprise customers. They were saying every endpoint should have a static IP to connect to these applications. Now that is not feasible, right? Because everybody uses some kind of a ISP, be it Airtel, be it a Jio, or whatever, and IPs is dynamic. So today the world is changing. You don't need to have only a IP address to prove that there's a kind of business endpoint or whatever. There are other modes of doing it. So even the government and Department of Telecom has to be flexible in terms of setting a policy and creating enabling a framework so that enterprises can continue doing this work and get those precious export revenues and all essentially. So that should not stop. In terms of manufacturing, it's difficult to say. So manufacturing also is becoming a little smart manufacturing, but still it is all location driven and you have to send people home. So I am seeing companies gearing up for that. So for example, maintaining safe distancing in the workplace, kind of maintaining a proper way of taking employees in and out of the premises, and all of that. And I guess logistics, movement of goods across the country, movement of goods into the ports, into the airports, those have to be kind of started. Otherwise, we are staring at I don't know economic crisis, which probably we have not seen in our lifetimes ever so far. Cybersecurity is essentially a layered defense strategy. You cannot build a cybersecurity defense only in one layer. It has to be in multiple layers, so that whenever somebody is trying to breach you, they face kind of hurdles at each and every layer. So we talked about cloud security. That does not mean that I can sacrifice endpoint security, right? So endpoint security, for example, all these antivirus, they used to work upon known static signatures. So all the known kind of threats, endpoints will get protected from. But now I'm seeing slowly a lot of work happening in the area of AI or machine learning driven. So user behavior wise, am I used to kind of access applications in a certain way? Do I go and log into SAP dead in the night? Do I do certain things? So it may look like a genuine transaction, but if you apply all these behavior characteristics, then you can think that possibly there could be some risk, and you can then have certain enabling controls. For example, multi-factor authentication, or asking them to authenticate one more time. So people have to be on their toes to think about security in defense, layered security at endpoint, at the cloud level, at the application level. See, what about your attack surface? For example, we still see running a simple scan on the internet. For example, any company, let's say start.xyzcompany.com, you will see so many of their applications, be it hosted on the data center or on public cloud like Azure or AWS. They're exposed to the internet. They are still using kind of outdated TLS protocols like TLS 1.0. So there are now known vulnerabilities, and IT people, network and security people, they have to wake up and see that they carry out full hygiene across the entire application landscape, across the entire endpoint landscape. We have to be on our toes, because the cyber actors, the threats, they are getting more and more fanciful tools. You don't need to be a a coder of a great coder to become a hacker today. There are enough tools on the darknet which you can procure, and you can kind of maybe with a few $100 you can launch a particular target attack on a company or enterprise. So we have to be on our toes and constantly evaluate and look at the security model, constantly look at data analytics, and see that our defenses are strong. There is never a 100% defense. We can be as best as we can. We are individuals, people are, God has given us a mind to think through, right? So defense or starts with you, starts at home. So essentially, though some links could look very kind of nice, you can think, okay, this mail is from my CFO or whatever, but you have to apply common sense and see, do I think that this is the right place, or so that thinking has to be on, and there's frankly no way that you can be protected. It's all upon each one of us, because as I told you, the phishing attack, it's not only a blind phishing attack today, it's a spear phishing attack. They have known you, that you are a person who possibly would have admin credentials, in the enterprise, and they are phishing you with a very kind of a like a mail or a link or something which looks absolutely genuine and very much suited to your work. So there's high probability you will click and you will go there. So one part is relying on human kind of common sense and your good nature to figure things out. Otherwise, at least you ensure that any traffic which is going back and forth from endpoints to applications, at least we are doing 100% inspection of SSL traffic. Today, most of the malware essentially is encrypted in SSL, right? So, as I told you, this cloud security, we can do kind of SSL inspection at scale, whatever traffic we throw, because of, the cloud gives you that kind of flexibility, agility, scaling factors. And even if you click on this wrong link, the cloud will protect you, because they would know that this is a domain which is not trusted, this is a URL which is not trusted, or you are carrying a kind of a payload which looks like malware, and they will stop that.
Thank you very much, Sudeep, for very insightful observations which you made. Really appreciated that, and many interesting takeaways one got in terms of what you shared. One of the key ones which I could think of is to have a uniform policy, security policy across, whether it is while working from home or working from office, is important. Second, bringing in the culture where the security, custodial of security is not just the CISO in the organization, but everyone who is a participant has an equal responsibility to be vigilant about how phishing attacks are coming on, whether some mail which has really come from a genuine right source, or partial name of that is the genuine right source and the other piece is something from somewhere else. That kind of awareness as well as culture has to be there within everyone. Only then we are going to be ensuring that in the organization we will not have to deal with serious issues which comes across because of such breaches which can happen. So thank you once again. May I now introduce to you the last panelist for this session. The last panelist for this session is our dear colleague Amitabh Sinha. Amitabh is a very distinguished, has a very distinguished background, academic background. He is the President's Gold Medal winner from IIT Delhi. Then he did his PGDM from IIM Bangalore, went to Illinois Tech to get his MS, and after that he worked with the IBM Watson Lab, wherein he was decorated with 5 patents to his credit. Post that, he spent years with working for some of the globally acclaimed consulting firms like PwC, E&Y in different geographies of the world, contributing to various clients in multiple transformational strategies across many geographies. So with that background, he's an astute professional, and he is also heading the TCG's analytics practice, digital and analytics practice. And we are very proud to have him to work with us. So without much ado, may I now invite Amitabh.
Thank you, Shuriptada. Thanks for the introduction. Good evening, everyone. So, very insightful discussions by Mr. Shumit Dattagupta as well as Mr. Sudhir Banerjee. Now, if I am to summarize the crux of the discussion, so what we would realize is that the problems are typically 3 or 4 folds. The first of all is everybody cannot be provided a device from the office. So the personal devices also need to be used, because this lockdown started all of a sudden, and then the office would not have so many devices to even distribute, right? So how do you harden those personal devices? That's one big problem. And without people able to move, back from office or to the home respectively, so the hardening has to be done remotely, and that's a challenge, right? Number one. Number two, basically the insecure Wi-Fi and also unstable Wi-Fi. So even if you're able to harden the personal devices and establish a VPN, but because of the insecure home Wi-Fi or the unstable Wi-Fi, how do we ensure that office-related work goes on properly without getting, like ingested with a malware or ransomware? So that's problem number two. Problem number three is, see, in order to make people, let's say, productive from home, you'll have to provide data, right? How do you ensure that the data that is exchanged with them or provided is provided in a secured manner? And what do I mean by secured manner? See, there are data which gets transferred through application, which is fine, but often Excel files, will get transferred, CSV files will get transferred, flat files will get transferred, and people would need to work on them. So how do you ensure that particular data transfer is also secured and does not get compromised with? So one, of course, is data in motion. So when the data is getting transferred, right, that you can, of course, take care through a VPN, through an SSL connection, it's fine. But what about when the data is at rest? So in that personal device or office-led device, right, the data is still there. And in most cases, if you would find, you'd realize that there are not too many devices, laptop or desktops at home. And in many cases, the devices would be shared because there are children at home who need to do their school online, classes online, spouse needs to work as well, and then that's also like entertainment also needs to be there. But what will you do? You can't work for 24 hours in a day. So which means you will be connecting to different sites. So you cannot put immense restrictions because then it will become difficult as well, right? So then moving on, so these are the actual challenges, right? So then what we also see is that since these particular quarantine zones are also see is that since they will go and connect to different websites, they might download different apps, possibly get ingested with ransomware and malwares without even being aware of it. That's a problem, correct? And then giving VPN gateway, it's not that easy because you need to go and add appliances. You may have provision for only like 10% or 15% of that workforce on the VPN. How do you suddenly scale it up? The appliances are not available. And sometimes it may not make even sense or ROI basis. So how do you address this kind of challenges? Going back to Mr. Dattagupta, he was saying that they have a lot of OT data and IT data, right? So while when the people were allowed to, come to the office or go to the factory, so they had access to the different systems, so they could plan. But in this case, those OT data or IT data even needs to be exposed to be able to be accessible from home. But those are very critical data because based on those data, those are mostly numeric data in nature. But you do a production planning, you do a trending, you actually find out whether your devices are malfunctioning or not, your systems are working fine or not, if there is an alert or not. So even those data which is getting transferred while in rest or even in motion, if they get compromised, maybe just a manual error or whatever, so then you are ending up doing a wrong projection maybe, right? So essentially, these are the challenges that you would face work from home in the scenario of COVID-19. So how can these particular problems be solved? How do you tackle an insecure and an, for example, non-stable Wi-Fi, right, at home? How do you ensure that the personal devices are hardened, but without too much restricting the employee or the families, right, who are using those? How do you ensure that whatever fake websites or apps that are being downloaded, they are not? You cannot keep changing your policies every day and push it back, right? So how can you get those alerts? How can you ensure that even if you have a limited VPN, they can be utilized over and over again in a limited manner, right? Maybe giving, like, for example, time intervals or windows through which people can actually connect on need based only. So if you look at it, the current, this is the challenges part. The good part is that there are technologies, cloud-based technologies, which are emerging. And we at TCG Digital, we are working with many of such technologies, for example, Elasticsearch, Logstashes of the world, where we are trying to create a solution on this. And something that we have in mind is typically people would be able to relate who have a Java background. So you understand JVM, right? Java Virtual Machine. So what it does is it actually goes and occupies a memory. Like whenever a Java program gets executed, the JVM is created as a container within your memory. But that's like an incubated zone or a quarantine zone. So whenever in the JVM, whenever the Java applications run, they cannot be interrupted by anything and everything. So it's like a quarantine zone, and it runs smoothly, and that is why Java is possibly one of the most secured programming languages and cannot be really attacked using a malware or virus, right? That's a concept. So we are working on that particular concept where the idea is that be it a personal device or be it an office device, can we create a quarantine zone? And all the important files related to office or important data will be kept in the quarantine zone itself. And there would be like agents which will keep on constantly monitoring that quarantine zone to detect any access beyond what is permissible or what is allowed as a trusted application or whatever. And that particular quarantine zone is incubated from external interferences, and that's how you can ensure that even whatever data that you have in rest is secured. And also, since this particular quarantine or incubated zone, which is like a small zone within your desktop or workstation itself, is getting monitored by an agent, maybe locally. So that agent keeps on sending informations if there is a deviation, if there is a pilferage, if there is an intrusion, back to the centralized monitoring server, which is at the office itself. And then the corresponding, based on that alerts, the corresponding, as Mr. Dattagupta was saying, like readiness, response, and recovery. So the response can then adequately be taken. The readiness will be ensured by that, by that incubated space, like a JVM I was explaining. And then with the alerts coming into the server side, the adequate response can actually be taken. So this is possible today because of the latest technologies, cloud-based technologies which you have, and we are creating solutions on that. And I'm sure the solutions that we're creating will be able to address the problems that Mr. Dattagupta and Mr. Banerjee kind of discussed. That's all from my side. Supratik, over to you.
Thank you very much, Amitabh. Indeed, it's an interesting set of issues that we have in front of us, especially with respect to what's going on today. At home, we have to deal with living with the family. We have to deal with situations of the kind where we have to watch Netflix. We have to deal with situations of the family where kids are having meetings with their friends on different platforms, on video platforms and likes of those. And yet we have to ensure that the security is not compromised. So it's a daunting task. Good news is, yes, there is a way forward available, provided we do the rightful thinking, we do the appropriate measures in order to create that security layer. May I now open up the house for question answer session? Over to you, Supratik.
Thank you, Mr. Sen. We have a lot of questions which have already started coming in, and we have little time. So without further ado, let's try see how many we can answer. The first one is marked to Mr. Shumit Dattagupta, and the question is, in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic, what are the most critical steps an organization needs to take to ensure cyber resiliency? Over to you, Mr. Dattagupta.
Hi, good evening. Yes, I think I delved some part of it during the initial discussion. See, work from home is a very, the new thing for the manufacturing industry, but I think it has been relevant for an IT industry for quite some time. So the most part where we have geared through is basically our users are in different geographical locations. So we have regional offices, people around Calcutta and outside the plant also. So we have to immediately activate, through a remote framework in a secured way. As Amitabh was telling, some people were supposed to log in from their personal laptops also. So keeping that in mind, we had to augment our security policies, security framework through an activation where we could use the users, assess the VPN. Some were also given the desktop direct. Some were also given VDI over cloud. We have moved some of the working desktop over the cloud so that there is a virtual desktop created and people can easily work through. We immediately activated the SharePoint portal, put a lot of those documentation on the portal environment. And then, of course, there were a lot of, because all the business deal with a lot of documents, e-signing and all. So all those solutions were activated immediately so that as an enterprise at the corporate level, that is available over the cloud. Yes, the important part to take care during this work from home COVID situation, the mantra is you have to be first on cloud and be first on mobile. So mobility and the cloud, this too should be the, I would say, way forward to address the situation where we are now. And this has to be strengthened, and this has to be also be made seamless for the users when they're working. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dr. Gupta. I think we can probably take just one more. This is for Mr. Sudip Banerjee. For organizations that have experienced a breach, what are the best practices to respond to mitigate the situation? Over to you, Mr. Banerjee.
Well, for organizations that are breached, the first and foremost is to ensure that the breach is identified in the minimum possible time, because the more the time elapses, essentially the damage can percolate. And nowadays, the breach they're also happening at a very interesting time. For example, when an organization is breached, immediately things don't start kind of working. So what happens is maybe the infected device could be endpoint, could be server. The malware essentially comes and sleeps, and then it would also start doing reconnaissance from time to time. It would try to identify what are the kind of other IT assets nearby in the same network. What are the kind of admin credentials which are required to break into those? It is like almost like military warfare, that you first sight your victim or something or asset, you do reconnaissance, you come in, you lie low, and then you start to percolate. So that's called the cyber kill chain. And essentially they are also disguised in a way so that the regular antivirus software or something, and in many cases they are not even upgraded or updated to the latest versions, that escapes scrutiny. I guess now it has to be a modern set of tools. See, technology is getting disrupted every decade or so. If you look at the technology of networks and technology of traditional security, they have been there for the last 20-25 years. So it's high time that they also change. So as I told in my talk earlier, instead of static signatures, think about actual data, think about user behavior, and start applying artificial intelligence or machine learning kind of technology to sense that something is going wrong or not. And it's essentially a cat and mouse game, and there's no kind of true answer. But the thing is, if you are breached, if you identify the breach in the shortest possible time, then of course you can stop the attack to kind of percolate all across the organization, and you can then take remedial measures, possibly take those infected devices or assets out of the network. If your servers are kind of breached, then you have to look at backup and recovery solutions, whether you can recover data from the last taken kind of backup, and then start with that. One good part about Indian enterprises, we don't have the problem of legacy. For example, if you talk about, let's say, a lot of US banks or insurance companies, they're still running very old kind of systems where people don't know the code base, or the maintenance is also difficult. Here, at least the tools are modern. Most of the enterprise server storage is on virtualized environment. They're not actually in like one physical server having one application. Those days are kind of gone. So it also doesn't take much for IT to bounce back. Now, whether you want to bounce back elegantly and in least time, that means you have to be alert and catch the breach, as soon as it happens. Yeah. Over to you guys.
Thank you very much, Mr. Banerjee. We're really out of time. So back to you, Mr. Sen.
Thank you, Supratik, and thank you all the panelists for the very, very interesting, enthusiastic, as well as insightful talk. And also thanks to all the wonderful participants who are out there for your participation. Only message which I would like to give to all of you is to stay safe with you and your families, and stay safe with your organizations by making sure that we are prepared for not only the coronavirus, but we are prepared for any other virus which can come and attack our respective organizations. On that note, have a wonderful evening and a great weekend.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.